Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me again in this lesson 13 where we continue our discussion on JPA and Hibernate. We will actually explore a different way in which we can query the database, and this is called criteria query, and you will see when and where is this really useful. Of course, as usual, we are gonna directly jump into code because I know this is the way you like it the most. Remember that if you are here with me live, you have a live chat, you can ask me questions in the live chat or simply just start discussions or whatever you want to say there. If it's a simple hi, that's fine enough. If you are not here with us live, you can still send your thoughts and questions in the comment section of the video. And of course, remember, you can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. With that being said, I have already shared my screen. I have cloned the previous project, the project from lesson 12, and I made sure I only have a simple entity, the simplest possible. If you are here for the first time and you know nothing about JPA and Hibernate, this is not a lesson to be. This is already lesson 13, so I would suggest you see the first 12 to be sure that you know all this stuff. I will not recap it forever. So normally I would assume now you already know all the things that are in place here, and I don't have to write them again from scratch every time, because otherwise we would lose a lot of time. So what you can see is that I have created the simplest of the tables, which is called customer. It's in a database demo, and it only contains two columns, an ID and the name, and I have populated with a few Johns. Why John? I have no idea. That was simply the easiest name that came to my mind. So we will use this simple database to prove our syntaxes and to create the simplest examples with criteria query. You will see that criteria query, even if in many cases I have seen developers considering it difficult, maybe heavy to understand, it is not necessarily like that. Of course, it depends on what exactly you want to do with it and how complex the query you write is, but the same could be the JPQL. No, if you write a query that is 50 lines long, it's normal to be also difficult to read. Same is with criteria query. True fact, it is more verbose. You will see that for a simple query, simple select query, you still have to write a few lines of code, but it has its advantages, and its advantages come from the fact that if you don't know in advance what you want to write in that query, for example, maybe your query, the logic of your query depends on some parameters. Maybe it's like you are on an e-shop and you have filters and the user has to select those filters, so you don't know in advance what exactly will you query in your database. No, maybe you have products and you give your customer the opportunity to search by price, order them ascending and descending, search by the name of the product, search by different attributes of the product. I don't know, the producer, the provider, the publisher, whatever. You might have different attributes that your user can select from, and maybe they can use multiple filters at the same time. Maybe you want to allow them the possibility to put in place any kind of search logic. So when you have to deliver the query, it's not possible anymore to have it up front or have it as a string, no, because we learned the way of using JPQL, no, and you know, it's easy to say select C from customer, C where X and Y and something, grouping by, having, whatever. So you know, you can write it like this, but what do you do when you don't know what these XYZ really are? Which are these conditions? No, anyway, it was like that. But what if you want in some case to have only X and Y? What if in some case you don't want the where clause at all? How do you do that? You cannot simply just use concatenation and create this logic yourself. I mean, you can do that, of course, but it's painful, no? There should be a way in which you can deliver this capability more straightforwardly than doing it yourself. And this is basically criteria query. One point to be mentioned is that criteria query only works for selecting from the database. So fetching from the database with criteria query is fine. You cannot use criteria query for inserting, updating, or deleting. Remember that JPQL can be used also for updates and deletes. Yes, updates and deletes. And not for inserts. However, criteria query can only be used for fetching. So you can only select using criteria query. That's an important thing from the very beginning, because sometimes people ask me, how do I write an update with criteria query? Well, you can't. Okay, you can do that, just don't think about it. Or at least at the moment, there is no such thing as doing updates or any other operation with criteria query. So that's why it's enough today to discuss only selecting. So what do we do? From the entity manager that we already have, you can create a criteria builder. So this criteria builder will allow us to create a criteria query. So this is the first step, is creating the builder. It's really important to remember that everything in criteria query is on a builder methodology, is built on a builder methodology, meaning that what you get here can be changed through methods. It's not immutable. And I will tell you immediately why this is really important. You will see that if you don't take this into consideration at some point, you might write things that are not okay. But okay, the builder allows you further to create a criteria query. So I will just simply say create query, and then I will introduce the criteria query. And of course, preferably you use the generic type, which should be the generic type of what you select. We will start with selecting an entity. You will, however, see that you can select also something else than just that. I think we should have had actually specified the class. So see, the criteria query has also the possibility to specify the class when you want it with a generic type. So that's why it's complaining here. I should have put it like this. I will show you later on in this lesson that you can also select something else. For example, like in the case of a JPQL, you can select, for example, multiple things which are not necessarily related to only one entity. And you will learn that you can do this as well here with something that is called a multi-select. So for the moment, let's use the entity, but I want you to remember that there can be something else than just the entity here. So it can simply be a sum of columns, data that does not reflect a specific entity, or that might reflect a DTO and not an entity. But say it's the simplest of the examples. So what do? First of all, I have to specify what I select. So I will say query from customer class. And this gives me what I call a root, meaning the root of selection. So this is the root, I can name it actually customer root. To be more specific and know exactly what I'm selecting. And now you use the query to select from the root. So I'm simply saying here query select from the root, and this is basically equivalent with select C from customer C. So you see, this is basically the from is the root, which is this part of the way you would have written JPQL. And then you specify the operation, which in my case is the selection that I want to apply. So this is equivalent now to saying select C from customer C. Having that in place, you can now use the already known create query method in the entity manager and provide the criteria query as a parameter. Remember that in the previous videos we have discussed about create query, but we have used it with a JPQL. So we have used one of these two methods. Precisely, we used this one because usually we prefer having a generic type that tells us explicitly what kind of object we retrieve. But if this one having the string as a first parameter allows you to provide a JPQL and it returns a typed query, using the create query with a criteria query will do the same thing, but instead of changing a string, a JPQL string, to a typed query, it will change a criteria query you have previously built and transform it into a typed query that you can now then query to send your information to the DB. So say create query, and then the typed query is what we get back. So that's why I prefer to actually use CQ here for criteria query instead, so that I can name this one query like this. And this is the CQ from criteria query, because the criteria query is basically not the actual query you end up with. The actual query is the type query, which you can build either via a JPQL string, which is something we've learned in the previous lessons, or using a previously built criteria query instance, like this case. And now it's pretty easy because you know we have the get result list or get single result methods. We've used both of them depending on what you expect your result is, and then you can do whatever you want with them. For our example here, should be enough just to print them in the console, because we are most interested in seeing also the native query that will be built behind the scenes. So that's why this property on line 22 here is on true, so that we can see the native query that will be built based on what we have written here. So just to recap a bit the steps before jumping into running this and seeing the native query. So to write the simplest of the queries, we needed a criteria query builder. We used that to create a criteria query object for a specific type that we expect to select. We specified the entity we use to query, to the entity basically we want to fetch data for, and this is called a root. And then we specified the operation we want to perform on that root, which is selection here. You will see that alternatively I will be able to use a multi-select later when I want to select something more than just, for example, the root. And then these three lines here, so these two lines here are the same as if you would have used JPQL. Once you have a criteria query, you use the create query method to transform it into a query, and then you can fetch the results using get result list or get single result. So I'm gonna run this and prove how it's working, and then we will jump into a new example, and I will show you a few of the most important things you can do with criteria query today. Of course, we cannot do absolutely all the operations. That's an infinite number of things you can do, but my feeling is that if you understand how this works, what we discuss in this video, it should be comfortable enough for you to transform this knowledge into any kind of query you would need in your applications. So let's see what happened here. We can see the large number of customers from my database that has been printed. but mostly we are interested in the query that resulted. So it's a select everything, meaning all the attributes of the customer from customer. So the simplest of the queries, you can even try to run it yourself here, and of course it will come back with the same result. Normally you see it's a generated query. It's the same kind of namings that you have seen also when we were using JPQL. So remember, this is the strange naming that Hibernate chooses when transforms either a JPQL or a criteria query into the native query that's then sent through JDBC to your database management system, and then retrieving back the result, the records. Cool. So this is the simplest. Now let's try to complicate a little bit the things, or at least try to step by step learn something new. So we will do more and more examples for this. Of course, I will comment this out, so it will remain. When I change something, I will comment out the previous, because I want then you know, I will put on GitHub, on my GitHub account, this, so you can play with it yourself. And I want you to have all the syntaxes that we discussed. Now, there is a possibility that you say select C name from customer C. So that's, if you want to do that, you will use from the root the get method. The get method allows you to provide the name of an attribute you want to select, you want to work with, not necessarily to select. You will see we can use this in different places, but in our case to select. And then what happens here is that the selection is applied for this and not for the entire instance. So now I only apply the select on the name attribute, being this, as I said, equivalent to say select C name from customer C, which means that now it will not be a customer anymore retrieved here. So I even expect, if I run here this one, to have kind of an exception in the console, no, because normally name is a string and it cannot be casted to a customer object. So let's see what happens if I only make that change. Of course, we do have a query type mismatch exception. This is something we expected. It even tells us quite nicely here that we expected a customer, but we got back a string. So what we need to do here is to make sure that this matches with what we wanted. So I have to change everything here now to a string. Okay, but I will then change it back, or maybe anyway. You kept just keep in mind that you need your type to match with what you want to select. So even if I don't change it back now for my examples, when you will try it yourself, what I meant is just make sure that you make the changes appropriately to what you want to select here. So now it should be working again, and again we are mostly interested in, this is not an entity. Okay, not a problem. Yes, indeed. When we select something like that, we cannot do that with a select, but with a multi-select. So that's why it's failing in this case. So the retrieval will be done a little bit differently than just with this, and we will get back an array of objects. That's true. It's I missed that. Although to be honest, I'm not sure exactly. So criteria query of string. Oh, this is my mistake. Sorry. So this must be from customer. Oh, that was my mistake. Sorry. So I don't need actually necessarily, I think, a multi-select here, because I only select one object. Yeah, sorry guys, it's just sometimes I miss some of these things because it's not something that I'm using on a daily basis. So even if I have plenty of experience with this, sometimes I have to I need a minute to remember. Okay, this is it. So you see, we now have exactly what I said here. So it's the equivalent of saying select name from customer C. You can see selecting now, it happens only to the name and not to the entire entity, meaning the native query generated only contains the attribute that you selected. Now you can see here, so my mistake was that I'm being in a hurry. I literally changed with string everywhere, but you have to remember that you like in the case of JPQL, you cannot select from something that is not an entity. Remember, whatever you put it here, it always in the JPQL you always had on the from an entity. You cannot have on the from something else than entities. Just go back to the previous lessons and remember how we were writing JPQLs. You can select something else, a DTO, or simply just an attribute of an object, or maybe you can have an average of something. Remember that we also learned about the functions, but never on the from. Never, there was never something else than entities, because this is the entire philosophy of ORMs. No, and you know that from the first lesson I tried to tell you, remember, when you work with an ORM, you are not working with tables, you are working with objects, and do try to keep with the philosophy. So I was basically, earlier when I made that mistake, I just changed with string everywhere because I was in a hurry. But my mistake was that this from something should always be from an entity. The same reason being you are with an ORM, and for the same reason you had this with JPQLs. Same is with criteria queries. So with from you cannot have something else than an entity. So I see a comment, just need to ask that for heavy traffic, why Express is preferred and microservice only architecture Spring Boot is preferred nowadays? If that is a question, I have to say that I didn't understand, so maybe you can rephrase if you want me to understand better what the question is. But the way it is now, I really don't know what to say. Sorry for that. Going back to what I was doing here, so I'm basically selecting now the name. Say I want to go even further and I want to try a multi-select. What if I try a multi-select? Because that was what I wanted to do previously. So the question is then, what if you want to select multiple things? And for example, here I should just go easy with selecting, for example, the name and the ID, which I know it doesn't really make sense, because normally if I want to do that, I would simply go with selecting the entire customer. But I will show you later that this can, for example, be transformed into something else, like applying a function. And when you try to do that, you use a function named multi-select here. Now when you multi-select, what you get back is an array of objects. I think it might work with a list as well. We can try it. I don't remember if they introduced or not that, but again, we need to make sure that the type applies correctly everywhere. And then of course, if you do it like that here, then I'm not sure if you will see anything if I print like this. Normally you will not see probably anything readable, but we can then go back and try to print effectively what is inside the array, because arrays don't have a toString method. Okay, let me try again the questions. Why Express.js framework of JavaScript is used more for trading and all types of apps? to be honest, I don't think what you say here is true. I'm not a JavaScript guy, so I don't want to go deeper than that. I only work with Java, but I see Spring Boot quite a lot used. I totally doubt that a JavaScript framework nowadays is more used than a Java one. But that's solely my opinion. I might be wrong. And again, I'm a Java guy, so if you ask me something about JavaScript, well, I don't know how to answer you because I'm not an expert in JavaScript. I actually don't use JavaScript at all. Are you going to discuss Hibernate caching? Yes, definitely, but that will be in a different lesson. Spring is used only for building microservices types. Not true either. So I have seen Spring in monoliths, microservices, service-oriented, and even testing and automation testing applications. So I don't agree with Spring is used for building only microservices because I've seen it in so many places where it's not microservices. Actually, many people don't even understand what microservices are. So they even say I'm building microservices, but what they are building is actually just a service-oriented architecture. So be careful what you trust and who you trust. Okay, so as I thought, you will not see anything of value. We can, however, analyze a bit the native query. So you can see indeed that we retrieved whatever we wanted there in the multi-select. And now, of course, if I want to prove you that what I selected is indeed the data that you expect, we can do it like this and say O of 0 plus space plus O of 1, and then you will see that. And while it's running, let me answer the next question. What web knowledge do I need before I go to Spring? I don't think that going to Spring is necessarily related to knowing anything on web. Remember, Spring is an application framework. You can even build desktop applications, and you can build, for example, automation testing applications with Spring, which are not related at all with web. But if you mean what web knowledge should I learn before going to Spring to build a web application, then of course you will need some web stuff, like needing to know at least how HTTP works, what the HTTP methods are, how do requests look like, what is a request, what is a response, what means synchronous, what means asynchronous, and potentially I would even recommend understanding a bit about Java servlets behind the scenes, because that's what Spring MVC uses. I hope that answers your question. And you can see now that, of course, all our records from the database have been retrieved. So you see, how can I multi-select? Now, what else can we do? So we can select, and we've seen various ways of selecting this. We can basically apply any kind of operation here. So I'm here at the select and multi-select, which you can take as the select operation, which is the simplest. But actually what you can continue with is using any of the clauses that you would have used in a normal query. Meaning, for example, if you want to order, you can order by whatever you want here. So to do that, I will use the builder, and I will build an order expression, which you can build using one of the ascending or descending methods, which I know already that you understand pretty much very well what they mean, because when you would have written something like select, and this is basically this select here, you would have said order by, and then you say what you want to order by. Say I want to order by ID, and then you have to specify whether the order is ascending or descending. So this is if I want to say descending, and then I use the root sorry, customer root was the name, to specify that I want an order expression that will order things descending by the attribute named ID in the root. So normally that should transform into exactly this query, and let's run it to see if it indeed happens. So while it runs, what is the difference between criteria query and specification of Spring Boot? I think you have already answered that yourself. Criteria query is something from Hibernate. Everything here is Jakarta persistence or Hibernate. Please remember that our project here doesn't use Spring at all. Okay, we don't have Spring here. We don't have any other framework here. The only three dependencies I have are Hibernate, MySQL, and Hikari for the connection pool. So what is the difference between what I use here and anything else that looks similar in any other framework? This is from JPA. Those others are from those others frameworks, because many frameworks might implement similar things. So that is basically the difference. Okay, what happened? So I did hopefully run it, no? Okay, here it is, and you can see how the ordering happened. So now my records are displayed from 35 to 1, and of course naturally we are interested in the native query that resulted, which you see that now has the order by add notation at the end. So what else should I be able to do? Of course, you might ask yourself, can I check using where clauses? Yes, you can apply as many where clauses as you need. So for example, here I can say that I want only to display GE means greater or equal. So take a look here at the methods that you have. You have greater or equal, you have equal, you have less or equal. So you can apply is null, is not null. You can apply all of these like operators that you know from I would say even native queries, but JPQL would be better. You can apply all these operators to your case. So for example, here, if I want to say that the ID should be greater or equal than a specific number, I just have to say where customer root ID is greater or equal than the value you want to apply. So normally, of course, the value would be something probably that comes from somewhere, a parameter, a variable, and so on and so forth. But this is now equivalent to saying I will only put a where. So where, maybe even better, I can cut out what's in front, and I can say this is the selection. Select CNAME from CNAME and CID from customer C, and then whatever comes there after is where, and then you can see here ID, or actually it would be CID greater or equal than 5, order by CID desk, no, something like that. And now we can run to prove that this is happening. Can we perform joins in the criteria query? Yes, we can perform all types of joins and subqueries in criteria query as well. But let's take them step by step and see from the easiest to the more complex. So you can see that the where clause appeared there. Is it okay to have a large query? For example, I want to check if table contains 5 objects. Yes, it is okay. There is no limitation with criteria query of having a larger or a smaller query. It's basically, it has the same limitations as the JPQL. and in reality, basically most of the queries you build with criteria query being dynamic and being dependent on parameters from outside parameters, they will end up being large. No, or at least in my experience, they ended up being large in most of the cases. And yeah, what else can you do? And remember, so all this, they would be not necessarily in one place. So I want to make sure that you understand very well that this is basically something that you can dynamically call. So you might have a situation where you say, hey, you will see that all this return the query. So you can say the query here has to select that, and then say semicolon, the query, select that, semicolon, and then you might dynamically, that's the use of this criteria query. That's why we use criteria query usually and not JPQL in the cases where you use them, because you can say in specific conditions add the where clause, and you can add multiple where clauses, for example, and those where clauses can be applied depending on several conditions. So you can build an entire logic on how you define the query. That's the whole usefulness of criteria query. Otherwise, of course, if you don't have to do that, then you'd most likely prefer to write this as a JPQL and not as a criteria query, because it doesn't make sense. Like, you see, it's verbose. It is verbose and less easier to read than JPQL. So I would prefer JPQL 1,000 times over criteria query. But the problem is, what if I cannot use JPQL because I want any of this to be dynamic? I want the orders to happen only in some cases. I want in some cases to be ascending, in others to be descending. How can I do that? How can I customize a query based on existing values at the runtime? Not with JPQL, but you can do that with criteria query. Okay, so remember, the usefulness of criteria query is basically this. What else? You can have grouping, you can have having, you can have, I don't think it's important to prove you all this, because now I think you realize that for everything you have a method that is called exactly as in JPQL. So if you know JPQL, then you know how to write criteria query. So for example, I can say group by the name. I know maybe it doesn't make sense, but you can imagine in a more complex scenario, you would have to group by something, and then you can say here, instead of showing the ID for the name, you can say builder sum of the customer, customer root get ID, which means group by name and sum the IDs. Sum, average, mean, max, whatever, all those functions that you have previously learned when we discussed queries like JPQLs, you can use them here as well. So this is an example where I'm grouping by the name and use the sum function to sum the IDs. The result in this case will, because I only have Johns, I only have one name, I have only John here. No, actually, well, let's put a Bill here just to have to say we have two names. So apply, change to Bill. So now I have one Bill and many Johns, but when I run this, we should only see two records. John will have all the sums of John, Bill will have only the ID of Bill, no? Because I've been grouping by name and summing the IDs, so that's what we expect to happen. Look, so Bill 35, John 505, meaning John, for John the sum of all the IDs. Where is it? So let's take this one. Okay, so all these IDs for John summed up, they have the sum 505, but Bill is the only one, so there is no sum made there, it's only 35. Okay, so yes, you can apply grouping by, having, order by, any of the functions that you have already learned, so they are applicable exactly in this way. And then I don't have any relationship in my example, but you asked me about joins. You said how can I make joins? So you can make joins the following way. From the root, from a specific root, you have a method called join, of course. And now I do recommend you use this method actually, which has two parameters. One is giving you the attribute, the entity with which you join, and the second one is giving you the join type. So normally, if I would have had here something I can join with, I would say join with whatever this is, and then provide the join type here. If you don't specify it, so if you use the join with only one parameter, it will automatically be inner, but you can choose to use left or right joins, and this work exactly the way in which you used them in JPQLs. So just to leave me a little bit more time, I will create a separate examples with inner queries and joins in the next lesson, because I need a little bit more time and I need a bigger structure. I cannot prove all this with only one table. If you want to join something, you need to join something, so you need more than one tables. So let's try to take this separately. But as an idea, both joins and subqueries, they are possible. You can write them with criteria query, so no problem with that. Let's see the next question we have. When using Spring Data JPA with Hibernate as a provider, the annotations entity one-to-many are part of Hibernate or Spring Data JPA. They are part of Hibernate. They are basically part of JPA, not of Hibernate, because as you can see, entity manager, factory, type query, everything is in the Jakarta persistence. Or if you would be using an earlier version, you'd have Java X persistence, because the namespace is changed due to legal legal stuff when the Java EE has been outsourced to Eclipse Foundation years ago. But yes, they are part of the Jakarta space and not part of Spring. I will dive. This is a playlist on Hibernate, so not on Spring. So I do try to avoid as much as possible answering stuff on Spring here. But at the end of the playlist, I will create also 1 or 2 lessons where we see how Hibernate integrates with Spring. And you will see that most of the annotations, like all these known ones, they are from JPA actually. But sometimes you end up with annotations such as ID, which might be from Spring as well. And this is where a lot of people make confusions. They use, for example, the ID from Spring instead of the ID from Hibernate. And that can be wrong depending on what you are doing. So I will tackle these things where annotations might be similar, what should you use in that separate lesson that I will create. Can we think of Spring Data JPA as a superset of Hibernate? No, we cannot. Hibernate is Hibernate. Spring Data JPA is totally something else. Spring Data JPA is only an abstraction layer of whatever comes down below it. So if you use it with Hibernate, which is also the convention in Spring Boot, we can say that Spring Data JPA It's a way to abstract and make things easier to write when you work with Hibernate. So it's not a superset of Hibernate. It's not something like that. It uses Hibernate on its full power behind the scenes. It just makes things easier by eliminating boilerplate code. And I'm not sure there is anything that I can show you or I wanted to show you today. Of course, we still remain to discuss the joins and the subqueries, but I need a little bit more time for that, so I will leave it to be not in a hurry for next lesson. However, I think we have seen I would say everything related to the majority of the queries, because in the majority of the queries you will probably not have necessarily too many things such as subqueries. Maybe joins, yes, but subqueries I doubt you will see too often. You have seen that we learned how to use all the essential and basic operations with criteria queries. So you normally know how to write a simple query that uses where clause, that uses order by, having, and any of the functions. So that should be it. There is one more thing I want you to be attentive with. Observe here that I have taken the root and then I have used the reference to it. Remember what I told you at the beginning of this video. This is a builder. It's called criteria builder for a reason. It's because it's a builder. So if you do something like that, this is a mistake I have seen in a few cases. Instead of taking the customer root, you just put this here again. This from is part of a builder. It will build another root. These two calls are independent. So can you guess what will happen if instead of taking the reference and using it, I would simply just call the from method again every time? Every time you call from again, it creates a new root. So if I'm running this, what you will observe now is that I don't only have the table specified one time in the native query, but 2 times. And if I would have used it here again, it would have been 3 times. And if I used it again here, it would have been 4 times, and so on and so forth. So take a look what happens. The results are totally different. Why? Look at the query. Select from customer, customer. Ooh, this is a cross product. So now it takes every row with all the others in the result, in the final result, changing completely the result of our query. Why? Because this is not simply a method giving you the reference of an object named root. It is a method that also builds the root itself. So if you call it here once more, it will add one more root, meaning one more table when we discuss about native queries into the query, creating a cross product and altering completely the way the query works. So be very careful with criteria query. When you call a method, it's a builder for a reason. It means it builds something. So make sure you consider that and you don't make mistakes such as that, because that would sometimes cost you, of course, a bug that can be easily seen. Like in my case, the output is different, and maybe I would have spotted that. I would have asked myself, hey, why do I have John here with 1, 2, 2, 5 times? By the way, Bill doesn't appear at all for some reason. Anyway, why do I have that? Because this and that. But what if the output, the way I would have written the query is that the output wouldn't have been different? I've had a case at some point with a customer where they simply had this cross product, but the output was not affected. The way the query worked there is that the cross product didn't affect the output like it does in my case. But of course it did affect a lot of performance, because when you have a cross product, the performance is automatically affected. You do query more data automatically. So they were investigating this performance problem. They didn't know where it came from. And it turned out it actually came from exactly this kind of a problem. One of the developers simply used the from multiple times, believing that this will simply just return the root, and not knowing that this actually creates another one, and thus making a cross product in that case. Sometimes it's difficult to debug these cases, especially with criteria query, because being something that we use in most cases dynamically, you do have conditions in which you apply any of this. So it's not as plain as it is in my example here. You will see fors, whiles, ifs and else, switches, different logic being written there that in the end builds the query that is transformed and executed. So it's much more difficult with a real world example from this point of view. And then something like that, it's not easy to spot when it happens. Sometimes maybe it happens only in specific cases. You have to be careful with that. Okay, with that being said, guys, I don't want to keep it longer than this. I will continue with the subject in the next lesson to allow it more time. And with that being said, I want to say again, thank you for all your questions and discussions. Have an excellent time for learning further. I'm waving goodbye and hope to see you in the next lesson. Cheers.